Nobody had spoken to Margaret Stroud in 90 minutes, and that was not an accident. Her father's bank had failed in October and taken half of Shropshire down with it, and every person in that room had lost something, and they had all agreed, without ever discussing it, that she was not to be seen. So she stood by the window and waited it out. Then a man she had never met crossed the whole length of the floor, in front of 200 people, and said 4 words that changed everything, and she understood, before the first turn of the dance, exactly what he wanted from her. Before we begin, tell me in the comments what country you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. I read every single one, and if you like stories like this, subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it means everything. She had come into the Ludlow Assembly Rooms at 9 o'clock on the 2nd of February with her Aunt Prudence, and by 4 minutes past 9 she had understood that it had been arranged. It was in the turn of the heads. Mrs. Ogilvy had been 3 feet away, with her back half toward the door, and had seen her, and had turned the rest of the way round, with a smoothness that must have taken practice. The Fenwick girls, whom Margaret had known since she was 7, had gone very pink, and moved off toward the card room together, like 2 boats casting off at once. And Colonel Prideaux, who had dandled her on his knee at 4 years old, and had called her Meg for 20 years, had looked at her across the floor with an expression of pure, undisguised misery, and had not come. That was the one that told her. Prideaux was not a coward. Prideaux simply could not afford it. "We shall go," said Aunt Prudence, at 9 minutes past. "We shall not. Margaret, if we go now, we have come and been driven out, and that is a story that lasts 20 years. Margaret took a glass of negus she did not want from a passing tray. "If we stay to the end and go at 1 o'clock like everybody else, then we came to the assembly, which is a thing we have every right to do, and there is no story in it at all." "There will be a story either way." "Yes," Margaret agreed, "but I should like some say in which one." Her aunt looked at her for a moment. "Your father," she said, "is in you further than anybody has yet noticed. Stroud and Nephew of Ludlow had been a bank for 41 years, and it had stopped payment on the 19th of October at 11:30 in the morning. Margaret had been in the shop, not the bank, the linen drapers on Broad Street, buying tape, and she had heard a sound come up the street that she had never heard before and never afterwards forgot, which was the sound of about 60 people beginning to run in the same direction. By noon there were 200 outside the door in King Street. By 3 o'clock there were 400, and the windows were broken, and her father had come out onto the step to speak to them, and had got about 6 words out before he went down. The physician called it an apoplexy. He was 58. He had lived. That was the thing Margaret had learned to say without any particular expression, because it was true, and because the alternative was to say the rest of it, that Josiah Stroud had lain in an upstairs room at Fen House for 3.5 months, with the whole right side of him gone, and no speech at all, that he understood every word said in his hearing, which they knew, because he wept at some of them, and that the one man in England who could have explained what had happened to Stroud and Nephew had been struck dumb on the day it happened, and had not said a syllable since. What Shropshire knew was simpler. Shropshire knew that a country bank had gone down, owing £140,000. It knew that the Ludlow Turnpike Trust had lost its whole deposit, and that the rector of Bitterley had lost £900 belonging to a charity school, and that Anne Pardoe, who kept the glover's shop, had lost her entire savings of £206, and had been to look at the shut door of the bank every single morning since October, which several people had seen, and everybody had heard about. And Shropshire knew that Josiah Stroud's name was on the paper. They were not wrong to be angry. That was the part Margaret had never once been able to argue her way round, in 3.5 months of lying awake. They had put their money in a place with her father's name over the door, and it was gone, and Margaret had grown up on the profits of it. The house, the pianoforte, the 4 years of school at Worcester, and there was no clean way to stand in a room full of those people and be pitied. So she did not ask to be pitied. She stood by the 3rd window at the Ludlow Assembly with a glass of negus and let them do it. At 10:30, a man called Reuben Hale asked her to dance. He was drunk, and he was about 30, and he had made a small fortune in hides during the war, and had been trying to get into the assembly rooms for 6 years. Margaret understood the whole of it before he had finished the sentence. He could ask her, because she was the only woman in the room who could not refuse without it being remarked, and if she accepted, he would have danced at the Ludlow Assembly with a banker's daughter, and it would cost him nothing at all. "Thank you," said Margaret, "but I am not dancing this evening." "Not dancing," he laughed. It carried. "Well, that's grand. That's very grand indeed, from a Stroud. My cousin had £400 in your father's bank, miss, and she's not dancing either, on account of she's gone to service at Kidderminster." The nearest 20 people heard it. Several more turned. Margaret stood absolutely still and felt the whole room decide, in one movement, that this was going to be worth watching. "Then I am very sorry for your cousin," she said, "and I mean that, and I will write down her name if you will give it me, because there is a list, and she should be on it." "There's no list." "There is a list," said Margaret. "It is at Fen House, and it is in my hand, and it has 911 names on it, and I have been 3 months making it, and when there is anything to pay out, if there is ever anything to pay out, I intend that nobody shall be missed off it, because they were too poor to have a solicitor write in for them." She held his eye. "Your cousin's name, Mr. Hale." He stared at her. "Sarah Hale," he said after a moment. "Sarah Hale of Corve Street. Thank you." He went away. It was not a victory. Margaret knew exactly what it was, which was a woman being shouted at in public and answering quietly, and she knew that half the room would say afterwards that she had been very cool about it, and that coolness was not what you wanted to see in a Stroud. She turned back to the window and found that her hands were shaking so badly she had to put the glass down on the sill, and then the room went quiet. Not silent. It did the other thing. The thing a crowded room does when everybody stops what they are saying at slightly different moments over about 4 seconds. Margaret turned round. There was a man crossing the floor. He had come in from the card-room end, and he was walking the whole length of the assembly, unhurried, through the middle rather than round the edge, and he was doing it in a way that made it entirely clear he did not care in the least how long it took. She had no idea who he was. He was perhaps 35, very tall, with dark red-brown hair, and a face that would have been handsome if it had been in the mood, and he was dressed better than any man in that room, and appeared to have given the matter no thought whatsoever. He stopped in front of her. "Miss Stroud." "Sir, my name is Sandford." He bowed. "I am Corvedale." Somewhere behind him, distinctly, somebody said, "Oh God," in a whisper. Margaret's stomach went cold. She had never seen the Duke of Corvedale in her life. Nobody had. He had been in Portugal and then Paris for 6 years, and the estate had been run by agents. But she knew the name from the paper on her father's desk, and she knew the figure that went with it, because she had written it in her own hand in the 3rd week of November. £41,600. The Corvedale estate had been the largest single depositor in Stroud and Nephew. It had lost more than the Turnpike Trust, and the Charity School, and Anne Pardo and Sarah Hale of Corve Street, and every other name on that list of 911, put together and doubled. "Your Grace," said Margaret. She was aware that everybody within 30 feet had stopped even pretending. "They are forming for the next," said the Duke of Corvedale. "Dance with me." It was not a question. It was not phrased as one, and it was not delivered as one. And Margaret Stroud stood at the 3rd window with her ruined hands at her sides, and understood, quite clearly, that she was being used for something. She could not think what. She could not think of a single thing. "Your Grace," she said, "do you know who I am? You are Josiah Stroud's eldest daughter, and you have been standing at this window since 9 o'clock. He held out his hand. "Dance with me, Miss Stroud." She put her hand in his. Afterwards she could never remember one step of it. What she remembered was the room, the whole room, 200 people, adjusting itself around a single fact in the space of about 90 seconds. Because if the Duke of Corvedale, who had lost £41,000 in that bank, would take Josiah Stroud's daughter down a set in front of the entire county, then there was no rule anymore, and everybody who had spent the last 3 months not speaking to her had just been made to look like a person who had lost their nerve over £11. She saw Mrs. Ogilvy's face. She saw the Fenwick girls come out of the card room. She saw Colonel Prideaux put his hand over his eyes for a moment, and she understood that she would be able to speak to Prideaux again now, and that he would be so relieved and so ashamed that it would be years before either of them mentioned it. And she saw, in the middle of the third figure, that the Duke of Corvedale was not enjoying himself in the smallest degree. "You are furious," she said. He looked at her. "You have not stopped being furious since you came into the room," said Margaret. "You are extremely good at it. I doubt 4 people here have noticed. But you are holding your jaw like a man in a dentist's chair, and you have not once looked at anybody but me, and I do not think that is a compliment." They turned. They came back. "No," said the Duke of Corvedale. "It is not." "Then why in God's name are you dancing with me?" "Because I have been in this county 9 days, he said, "and in 9 days I have been told about 40 times, by people who were very pleased to tell me, that your father is a thief, and that his daughter has the brass to go out of doors. And this evening I stood at that end of the room for an hour and a half, and watched 200 people do a thing to a girl of 25 that I would not have watched done to a dog." His voice did not rise at all. "And then I watched a man in trade shout at you about his cousin, and I watched you give him the woman's name and address without your voice shaking, which I could not have done, and I decided that if this county wants a rule, then it can have mine instead." Margaret missed the step and recovered it. "That is not the whole reason." "No. Say the rest." The music was coming to the end of the figure. He turned her and brought her back and said, very quietly, into the space of about 3 seconds, "Because I want the private ledgers of Stroud and nephew, and I have reason to believe that you have them, and I would very much rather ask you for them in a room where 400 people have just seen me treat you like a gentlewoman." The dance ended. He bowed. Margaret curtsied. "Thank you, Miss Stroud," said the Duke of Corvedale. "Your Grace," said Margaret Stroud, "you did not ask me to dance. You made me an offer, and you made it in public, so that I would understand what it cost you, and what it is worth to me, and you did it before you named your price." She straightened up. "My father did that too," she said, "for 41 years. So you may call at Fen House on Thursday, and I will hear you out, and I will tell you now, standing here, that I have had those ledgers in a locked trunk since the 22nd of October, and I have not opened them once, and you may make of that whatever you can." Fen House had been sold in December, and they were living in it on sufferance until Lady Day. That was the arrangement the assignees had made, and it was not unkind. The house was let, and the tenant did not want it until March, and there was a sick man in an upstairs room who could not be moved without killing him. But it meant that everything Margaret walked past belonged to somebody else now, and that there were chalk numbers on the backs of the chairs. She spent Wednesday getting the house ready for a duke, which mostly consisted of deciding which room had the fewest chalk numbers in it. "The morning room," said Aunt Prudence. "The bookcases are gone out of it,